Vannin had been torn asunder. King Lorsan the Black had died without a direct male heir, and his cousin Artur ascended to the throne of Vannin. The kingdoms of Naren and Alba passed to Lorsan's daughter, as those kingdoms still had agnatic-conatic succession laws, so on one hand this was a disastrous state of affairs. On the other hand, the rebellion that was responsible for killing King Lorsan the Black ended, for the enemy had no title to contest because Naren was no longer under Vannin control. Wasting no time, King Artur petitioned his cousin Sybil to relinquish her claim on the kingdom of Naren and her holding of Alba. But her proud and ambitious mother said that the kingdom was rightfully hers. She elaborated, stating that indeed Vannin belonged to her also, and if it weren't for a fleeting failure of her late husband's better judgment, the direct and rightful line would continue unabated by bothersome cousins and uncles. Seeing the severity of his situation, and not looking to lose his newfound position, he quickly declared war upon the child queen Sybil. As such dire instability naturally welcomes heresy, 2 heretic revolts rose up in Vannin, and 1 in Naren in 1018, all of them Waldensian in nature. Later that year, the crusade for Antioch would end in success, the tide of war turning after Lorsan's failed expedition, thusly establishing the Crusader state of Antioch in the Holy Land. Meanwhile, the crown of Vannin received some remittances from the Pope for the kingdom's involvement, which enabled King Artur to hire a great deal of mercenaries and fight the Battle of Waterford. This battle was a simple siege, and while the followers of Queen Sybil of Naren and Alba were passionately loyal, the fact of the matter was that they were now hopelessly outnumbered. After a month-long siege, the city was overcome, and the war against Queen Sybil would end in success for King Artur Monad in 1019, resulting in her and her mother going into hiding for fear of their lives, despite assurances from Artur that he would not have them killed. Where they hid was unknown, but it is thought that they fled across the channel to the court of Alençon, which would be happy to receive royal claimants to foreign thrones. With Vannin reunited and stability restored, the kingdom could resume the work of forging ahead. King Artur was an especially devout man, and as such soon earned himself the moniker of the Pious. King Artur the Pious would not be king for very long, however. Struggling to deal with the lingering elements left of the 2 heretic revolts, the kingdom of Cymru declared war for a de jure claim they held against Vannin and certain southern holdings. Shortly after the declaration of this war, he was assassinated in his sleep on the 16th of April 1021 at the age of 42. His son, King Corsedale Monad, assumed the throne at age 15. The boy's regent, a man named Niall Orkney, lowered crown authority without his consent, which undid much of the progress his predecessors had made in consolidating power. Thankfully, he was later arrested on an unrelated charge of espionage, providing clandestine information to Cymru regarding the war. King Corsedale was an ugly man, but despite his looks, he was able to find a wife once he ascended the throne. After Cymru, long engaged in a war against heretic rebels itself, lost a large part of its southern territory to those rebels, King Corsedale wasted no time and declared a religious reconquest of the newly independent territory, seeing this as an opportunity to prove himself to his new vassals. The war against Ystrad Taiwi was won by 1022, giving noble Vannin yet another port to the sea. King Corsedale now had to look north to that grave threat of 9,000 heretics that plagued his father's rule, festering in place for years. Filled with a zealous spirit after this most recent holy war, the kingdom embraced their new king, and produced 12,000 men to fight the heretics. The rebels were slaughtered in the hills of northern Alba, and the kingdom could once again return to prosperity. As though surging back from the chaos, King Corsedale used this momentum and continued the work of conquering duchies in the south and securing new territory for Vannin. Over the next 7 years, he would chip away at the meager kingdoms of the south, always knowing when to take advantage of an opening or a weakness in an enemy, earning him the moniker of the Wise. Unfortunately, he would also meet with an untimely grave, as during a war with Essex, King Corsedale was killed in battle by Count Efor of Ystrad Taiwi on the 7th of November 1029 at the age of 23. His 4-year-old son, Hain, inherited the throne, and once again an orphan king would be charged with continuing his father's work for the glory of Vannin. The southern kingdoms made this exceedingly difficult for him by forming a defensive pact against Vannin, unified in their defiance of the increasingly dysfunctional Black Dragon. King Hain Monad was born into a court rife with corruption and intrigue. The trend of kings meeting early graves had led inevitably to true power spilling into the hands of the nobility with each succession. In short, it was chaos at court. Indeed, over the course of the next 2 years, the child king survived roughly 6 attempts on his life by his appointed regent Onegus, who was later revealed to be possessed. King Hain, witnessing this awful state of affairs, knew what he had to do. An ugly monarch in a hostile court, he had to reinvent himself and renew the conquering spirit of his forebears. As soon as a challenge arrived to test him, he would rise to it and prove himself, bringing his nobility into line. Meanwhile, despite inheriting his father's bad looks, King Hain too found himself a wife in 1039. During a rather large war declared by Essex in 1044, he personally killed the enemy Queen Greta in battle. Essex around this time was the head of the Defense League aligned against Vannin, so this victory was crushing. This was also the beginning of his great trial to prove himself and his journey towards becoming a master swordsman. In 1049, Pope Gregorius V called the Fourth Crusade, this one for Misr against the evil despot Sultan Murshid II, who controlled northern Egypt. Around this time, Aquitaine tried to press claims it held on the Isles among the southern kingdoms, so Vannin contested their claims, desperate to prevent the incursion of continental powers, and King Hain wishing to defeat them in battle to bolster his own reputation. 2 main armies were fielded, Vannin at 15,000 and Aquitaine at 16,000, and despite several close calls, Vannin was ultimately victorious. King Hain, utilizing his knowledge of terrain strategy, would deliver a series of humiliating defeats to the bloated ranks of the Aquitaine armies who were unfamiliar with the region, even running them down when they tried to escape the slaughter. The Aquitanians were thusly driven back by Vannin. By the year 1056, the Pope called off the crusade for Misr, which was notable for being the first failed crusade. After defeating a peasant revolt in 1059, King Hain gained the title of the Just due to how humanely he treated those peasants he captured. Taking time to recover after the war with Aquitaine, a discernible pattern could be made out among the southern kingdoms, which was mirrored in the wider realms of Europe. The kingdoms which were most likely to be the major powers of the continent were beginning to coalesce. For example, Aquitaine was competing with Alençon for control of the area once known as West Francia, and on the Isles this phenomenon took the form of Vannin's longtime rival Essex, which took the opportunity to try and consume as much territory as it could while attempting to coalesce a defensive pact against Vannin. The vigilant King Hain the Just was not put off this competition, however, and rose to the threat that the disorganized masses of the south presented. In 1056, he claimed the kingdom of Anglandi, giving him de jure claims on large swaths of his rival's lands, but the prize he sought first was the Duchy of Westax, held by Essex. He declared war for it that same year. King Hain the Just raised the largest army in Vannin's history, roughly 22,000 men strong, to face the combined forces of Essex and Denmark, who joined the defensive pact. The first battle was with the main force in Somerset, a comparatively small siege party of 6,000 men, which was easily swept away by Vannin's steel. Only a year into the war, half of Essex broke out into rebellion, the masses discontent with their inept monarch. By the end of 1066, King Hain the Just won the war and cleaved Essex in half, leaving what was left of their wounded sons to fight their own people. 2 of King Hain's sons left to join holy orders, his sons Beitan and Lorsan to the Order of Calatrava. In 1075, Prince Hain died at age 31 under suspicious circumstances, leaving his grandson, a teenager also named Hain, as the new heir to the throne of Vannin. In the 1070s, seeing the growing power of Cymru and the threat they presented, a claim was made on all but one county of that kingdom, and King Hain the Just marched his great army west. A decade-long war was waged, characterized by innumerable ambushes and lightning-fast mounted combat, but by 1080 he would indeed have all but one county, thus felling Great Cymru. In 1084, due to the failed crusade, the Knights Templar were formed. In 1086, Pope Johannes VIII, emboldened by this new holy order, called the Fifth Crusade, now upon the Hussamids for Portugal. In 1087, while kicking the Danes out of Nordfolk, King Hain the Just, while wounded, fought and killed the Emperor of Denmark Vagan the Cruel, leaving his possessed son to inherit a crumbling empire. Desperate, the Danes called upon the remains of Vannin's wretched enemy Essex into the war, and if the defeat of that kingdom just a few years prior were not enough, King Hain the Just, even while still recovering from that first wound, killed King Egbert the Kind of Essex, thus ringing the final death knell for the dignity of that realm. King Hain, called the Just, returned to the Lord on the 12th of April 1089 at age 63, dying of an infected wound. He proved himself indeed. Always at war, his disloyal nobles at court were either unready or unwilling to challenge him. Now, his grandson, King Hain II, rose to the throne at the age of 28.